So hello and welcome. Happy Friday. Today is Friday, February the 14th. If you don't know that that's Valentine's Day, you might already be in trouble. So anyway, this is Backyard Beekeeping Questions and Answers, episode number 293. I'm Frederick Dunn.
This is the way to be.
So anyway, what's going on outside? As you saw in the opening sequences, it's really cold, it's snowy, and there is no end in sight. Isn't that frustrating? 16 degrees Fahrenheit, which is minus 9 Celsius. 1.8 mile per hour winds, that's not terrible. That's 3 kilometers per hour. 95% relative humidity. It's been snowing off and on. And all next week, we're going right back down to even colder temperatures, so the snow is not melting off. Not much of a break at all. So if you want to know what we're going to talk about today, please look down in the video description and you'll see all the topics in order. We have one topic today. I'm going to spoiler alert there. If you want to know how to submit your own question, please go to the main website, thewaytobee.org. Click on the page titled The Way to Be, and there's a form there for you to fill out. Also, if you've got something that's on your mind right now and you just have to talk about it, Google The Way to Be Fellowship, and you can go there, join the group, and have all your questions answered. Talk among peers, day, night, 24/7. So everything is great. What else do we have going on? I think that's just about it. Let's get right into today with the very first question. This question comes from Chuck in Akron, Ohio. It says, "Hi Fred, I was watching The Bee Supply with Blake Shook. He was mentioning that a lot of beekeepers are losing high losses of bees. He mentions more on the commercial beekeepers who are pollinating almonds in California. I personally had 6 hives and I've lost 3, so 50%. Do we need to worry?" So here's what I do. Who do you think I reached out to for today's discussion to answer this question and a lot of other questions that backyard beekeepers might have? I reached out to Blake Shook, so he is my guest today. We're going to talk about bees. At the very end, we're going to mention a little bit about avian influenza because that's also on people's minds. So let's put it in perspective, and without further delay, here's Blake. Blake Shook, I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for agreeing to talk to me. This was kind of last minute. We've crossed paths a couple of times without actually talking, so I'm glad to finally trap you and get you on a Zoom. And I'm sure everyone watching me, even though my primary group are backyard beekeepers, I think the news has reached everyone that bees are dying. And so I thought I would reach out to somebody who really is in the middle of it when it comes to commercial beekeeping. So if you would please, in the odd chance somebody doesn't know who you are, just who you are, where you are in the world, and what do you do?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, and it's been great to pass you in the halls. Seen a couple of your presentations and was thoroughly entertained and learned several things too. So thanks for your work. Thanks for having me on. That's very, very appreciated.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I was a hobby beekeeper for quite some time, actually. So I started keeping bees when I was a kid. I was about 12 and got into beekeeping through a youth scholarship program at my local bee club, and was kept a couple hives in my parents' backyard for a number of years. And so my first introduction to beekeeping as a first generation beekeeper was hobby beekeeping, and one of my first ways I made money in beekeeping was teaching beginning beekeeping classes, which is something that one of my companies still does a lot of today. And education is near and dear to my heart. Our YouTube channel is focused primarily to small scale beekeepers and how to manage 2 hives in your backyard, not 2,000. So I'm very tied in with the small scale community. Still, that's how I started. I speak all the time to small scale beekeepers. So yeah, I certainly have a foot in both worlds. I am a commercial beekeeper. Got so passionate about beekeeping that 2 hives just wasn't enough. I got addicted, and before I knew it, that grew to 200, and then 2,000, and then 30,000, and so now I have a number of different businesses in the beekeeping world, from a migratory commercial beekeeping operation to I own the Bee Supply, which is a small scale beekeeping retail store, a chain of stores. um, Commercial Bee Supply, where we sell supplies to commercial beekeepers, Desert Creek Honey, where we pack and sell honey nationwide, We have a pollination business in California. We have a business where we raise and sell honeybees to other resellers. So yeah, kind of invested in all segments of the industry, if you will.
Let's back up a second. Did you say 30,000 colonies?
Hmm.
Is that where you're
Hmm.
at right now?
Well, not right now. Last summer I was,
Is that the
and hope to
what's
be there again this coming summer.
so is
Yeah.
that the highest number you've ever achieved as far as commercial beekeeping goes?
Yes. Yes. That's the highest number. We've managed more than that. So certain times a year we've been managing far more than that. But that's as high as I've ever
Yeah, and
gotten
we're going to
personally.
get into that too because a lot of people don't understand how complicated this world is. But the other thing is, when I was down in Austin, Texas, here, if somebody's got 40, 50 hives, that's a pretty decent collection of bees in
Hmm.
one of our
It is.
apiaries in the state of Pennsylvania. Yet, down in Austin, I met 5 year, you know, beekeepers that have been doing it for 5 years with 2,000 to 6,000 hives because of
Mm.
something called the ag exemption. Um,
Mm. Yes.
so you've got the scale of beekeeping in the state of Texas is enormous. Is that where most of your bees are located?
So yes and no. So yeah, in Texas we have ridiculously high property taxes, and so you can get a ag exemption on those property taxes if you have beehives. So that kind of got a lot of people into beekeeping really fast. My bees are in Texas, the Midwest, and California, depending on the time of year. So they do move. Some of our bees do stay in Texas. So, we do raise and sell a lot of bees, and some of those stay in the state of Texas. But we do move around too, which, contrary to popular belief, or maybe contrary to what some people may understand, it's actually can be really good to move bees. I mean, when it's 110 degrees in Texas and every flower's dead after the 4th of July, the best thing you can do is pick up your bees and move them to North Dakota where it's 75. Spring is just starting and they've got fresh forage. Bees don't do great in extremes. And so getting them out of extremes can actually be a pretty beneficial thing for them.
Have you been to Laferia, Texas?
I have not. Sounds like fun, but I
Uh,
haven't.
113 degrees in the shade when I was down there looking for the golden
Oh,
carapace tarantula, which
oh,
beekeepers
it's
love
terrible.
tarantulas. I'll bet being in Texas, you see some sideline animal species that may catch you a little off guard. Give me one
For sure.
story where you ran into something that you didn't want to see, and what were the circumstances?
Oh my goodness. There would probably be many. I mean, how about a tarantula story? So, I put on my bee suit the middle of the night one night. We're out moving bees, and I had my bee suit. I took it off to eat a midnight lunch, threw it on the ground, and finished eating my lunch. Got my bee suit back on, and I feel something crawling around on my leg. I'm like, oh man, there's a bee in my suit. So I try to jiggle my pant leg and I feel like it's a whole lot bigger than a bee. And so I do the bee dance really fast, unzip my suit, and there was this massive tarantula that had crawled into my bee suit. So it was unwelcome. I think I would have preferred the honeybee for sure.
I think we just lost 1% of our audience on that one story right there.
I'm sure you did.
Statistically, 1% of the people are supposed to run out. If you've seen my presentations, I sneak spiders into them. But
Yes.
that's a
I
great
didn't hurt the tarantula
That's
though.
actually a
I
great story,
uh,
and
I,
I
I didn't
like what
hurt
you
it.
mentioned too, because you're working with your bees at night because of the temperatures, but that's also
Mhm.
when the tarantulas are out and about because they're in their holes during the day. So that
Yeah.
was just a
Yeah.
prime. So something besides a tarantula, what else have you encountered? Snakes. Got any snake stories?
You know, lots of snakes. I think one of the more fun ones though would be skunks. And so skunks love to live underneath the pallets. So commercially, we keep 4 beehives on a pallet, and there's a gap under the pallet. And so on more than one occasion, we have lifted up a pallet of honeybees, and there will be a family of skunks underneath. And of course, they spray as soon as you lift up the pallet.
Um,
And so the most memorable time, there was this 75-year-old beekeeper I was working with, and he was in a bobcat. And, bobcats are really enclosed. You can't just jump out of a bobcat. He's kind of it's not glassed in, but you're kind of caged in when you're driving a bobcat. And so he picks up this pallet, and Yes, yeah, guy's 70, probably actually closer to 80 at this point. And these skunks start spraying. It's a whole family of skunks. And he he knows he can't get out quickly and run. So he just floors that forklift and he's got a stack of beehives on the forks. And he is going probably 20, 25 miles an hour across this field, and beehives are just flying off this pallet uh, all over the field. And he's just bumping, bees are falling, and he smelled like a skunk for about a month after that.
Hey, I was curious, you mentioned the baby skunks, super cute, by the way, but they have a tendency, unprovoked, to just let you have it. So I don't
Yeah.
actually like them very much. And for those that are probably wondering, and I know they are, what's the effective range of an adult skunk? 10 feet. So
Mm,
if you're at 10 feet and 3 inches, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it at
yeah.
all.
He was about
It's
5 feet, so they got him pretty
okay.
good.
All right. So I also want people to understand you serve on some boards, right, that regulate beekeeping, or you've got your finger on the pulse of the national image when it comes to
Mm,
honeybees. Would you like to explain maybe what your
sure.
involvement level is, and if you hold positions,
Yeah.
what they are? Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. I mean, look, I'm not a naturally outgoing person, and I learned really early in my life that the best way for me to get to know people and give back was to serve. And so I started serving in my local beekeeping club, and then became the president of our Texas association, and have always served in my career in beekeeping. And so that's proven to be a great way to get to know a lot of people, but also to help when things like what we're facing now arise. And so I am on the executive board of the American Beekeeping Federation, which is kind of the largest industry uh, federation and group in beekeeping. And then I'm also on the board of the American Honey Producers Association, which is another one of the largest beekeeping industry organizations. And I just finished my term, but for many years I've been on the National Honey Board, which is helps market and promote honey in the United States. So it's a appointment from the Secretary of Agriculture to help oversee and promote honey in the U.S. So those are the most exciting titles, I guess.
I don't know if there are any bigger organizations than the ones you just named. So that's the ABF. Is the middle one AHA? What
AHPA. Yeah,
AHPA? I want to get these
right.
right. And then the NHB.
Yes, correct.
I don't know how you have a microsecond to yourself. Um,
I honestly have really, really good people that work with me. My standard of hiring is to hire people smarter than me, and it's a pretty low bar. But
it's a low
it
bar.
helps. It helps. Yeah.
Okay, so this seems to be, social media is on fire with bees and speculation on why they're dying. And backyard beekeepers want to know if they're going to be affected, if it's just commercial beekeepers, cause and effect. But one of the things I want to know about is this didn't just suddenly happen. I seem to remember it was one of these big boards where somebody was given a presentation and they were concerned about meeting the number of colonies they were going to need for pollination. And pollination in California right now for almonds is ongoing, is that right? Right
Right. Right. Just
now? Okay.
started. Hmm.
So they kind of knew ahead of time there was going to be a shortfall, and then something else happened that it was even bigger than they thought because they were kind of reaching out to sideliners to fortify their numbers. Now, you are also is it a broker?
Right.
Or,
Hmm.
okay, would you please explain kind of this dynamic, how it
Hmm.
happens, and how these people, these beekeepers, get their bees to California? And if they're working through a broker, what is kind of the job scope of a honeybee
Sure.
pollination services broker?
Yeah, of course. So who'd have thought we'd have brokers in beekeeping, right?
Yeah.
So about 85% of the world's almonds are produced in the Central Valley of California. And so that's a lot of almonds. And or as the locals call them, they don't call them almonds, they call them almonds, and that's because you shake the L right out of them when you're shaking the nuts off the tree.
I
So
see what you did
uh,
there.
yeah,
Yes.
so uh, so it takes essentially every commercially managed beehive in the country to supply enough bees to pollinate the almond crops. So basically, every commercial hive has to go to pollinate the almonds. Most commercial beekeepers, or about 50%, don't want to physically go to California. They're maybe in Florida or Georgia or the East Coast, and they don't have the employees ready that time of year. And so they want to just send their bees to someone they trust in California to put their bees into the almond orchards, make sure that everything goes okay, then ship the bees back to the beekeeper. And so that's where I step in, and lots of other companies step in, where it's okay, you send me your bees. So you load them up in Florida, you send them to me in California. I will unload them, put them in the almond orchard, make sure the almond grower pays, make sure the bees are taken care of, and then I will send those bees back to you once they're done pollinating. And I'll charge a small fee for doing kind of all the logistics work. So that's what a broker does, more or less.
Now, when they send those bees to you, I think you noticed this year that when they arrived on the trucks, you do this kind of receiving inspection of the colonies to see kind of
Right,
what their condition is. And
right.
you seem to be kind of surprised that a lot of them weren't viable
Mhm.
or were even dead. Wouldn't they have
Right.
known that before they shipped them out to you? Or did something happen in transit?
Yeah, so luckily nothing happened in transit. A lot of these bees are coming out of overwintering storage sheds indoors. So, this became really popular 8, 9 years ago, where a lot of commercial beekeepers are overwintering their bees indoors in perfectly climate controlled facilities that are fantastic for bee hibernation. And so they wouldn't have looked at their bees since they went into those sheds in October. And so I'm kind of the first person to look at them. Other beekeepers, might be in, colder climates where they couldn't really look at them. Other beekeepers still overwinter their bees in California, and you don't really start inspecting and grading those bees until early January. So the Florida guys, for example, yes, they looked at their bees and they alerted us pretty early on, hey, there's going to be a problem. But usually January is the month where the entire industry is looking at their bees, grading their bees, checking on them, coming out of winter, preparing to go into almonds. So you kind of have over I would say, a 2 week period. The entire industry is looking at their bees at the same time. And that's really where you start to see problems, if there's going to be problems in that couple week span of time.
Okay, can you give me a sense of the numbers of colonies we're talking about? Uh, Prior to the losses, what number of colonies would be under your management or as a broker that you're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it depends on years like this, it's a lot less because there's not as many bees out there. So many have died. But anywhere from, 40 to 80,000 beehives, is what we would put our hands on, depending on the year.
And so to put that in perspective, overall, how many hives are going to California for the,
About 1.5 million range, 1.5 to 1.8, depending on the year.
and since you know all these stats right off the top of your head, um, in the past, have we been able to meet the demand for pollination services in the almond groves
Yeah.
in California?
So the interesting thing is, yes, I mean, there have been times if we go back. So the planting rate of almonds has been skyrocketing. And we did hit a point about 15 years ago when colony collapse, about almost 20 years ago, when colony collapse disorder hit and plantings were skyrocketing. There were not enough bees. And that's why we saw the price paid for pollination skyrocket.
Mhm.
Over the past 5 years, beekeepers have done a phenomenal job, despite, terrible losses, of ensuring that plenty of bees are available for almond pollination. So I would say over the past 5 years, we've had plenty of bees for almonds. The estimates last year is that we were actually anywhere from 1 to 300 to 1,000 hives long. We actually had a lot of extra bees in 2024.
Okay.
Um, and so yes, we've been doing a great job of making sure that we do have the bees we need. And that's why the change this year has been so surprising and stark, because we went from 1 to 300,000 extra hives to estimates currently of being 3 to 500,000 hives short. And so that's a pretty massive loss, in a 1 year period.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but the growers are expanding their operations to the rate of 30,000 acres a year out there. Does that sound right?
Historically, yes. Historically, yes, or more. I mean, there's some years it's been as high as 60,000 or more of an 100,000 acres of growth. That
Mhm.
has largely leveled off the past few years because of water shortages. So the growth rate is largely stopped. I mean, California is producing as many almonds as it can with the water availability that it has. So I don't see that growing much. It's plateaued at a very
Okay.
high level.
So
Yeah,
even the environment can't sustain what they're
correct.
putting on it. So when you mention the
Correct.
water, where's this water coming from?
Yeah, so I mean, California gets water from three sources. They get it from underground aquifers they pump out of. They get it from reservoirs, which are largely fed by snowpack in the mountains, and then they get it from rain. And so that's what they've got to work with.
Oh, the Colorado River is not part of feeding water to, is that LA? Where does the Colorado River water go? Isn't that part of
Yeah,
it?
it does. It helps. It helps as well. That's
Okay.
that's a piece of it, but yeah, a relatively small one.
Okay. So good. No stress, no variables. That's what I wanted to hear. All right.
Exactly. It's a
Now,
piece of
as a
cake.
broker, do you work with specific almond companies? Like some of the big ones? Is Blue Diamond one of the bigger companies up there?
Yeah, so Blue Diamond is a grower co-op. So a couple hundred or 300 to 400 different growers sell their almond or contracted to sell their almonds to Blue Diamond.
Mhm.
Then Blue Diamond processes the almonds, has their Blue Diamond label goes into the grocery store with it. So Blue Diamond isn't necessarily a grower, but they're a cooperative of growers. So yeah, I mean, we work with Blue Diamond growers, certainly. We work with a lot of different growers out there.
Do you have a preferred grower that you like to work with? Do you
I
want to
better
name
not
them
say
right
that
here so that
publicly. I better not say that.
you can alienate all the others? Okay.
Exactly. Yeah. I do have a fur grower, but I don't dare say it out loud.
Okay, we'll talk later. All right, so the logistics of this. Now, there's a lot of restrictions in California when it comes to treatment of bees and things like that. So, some of the beekeepers do some pre-staging or something. Is that right? Is this outside of the state and then they do something, or they get them inside the state of California as
Yeah,
pre-staging so they can do other things? Can you explain what some of
yeah,
those?
sure. So one of the things you're probably referring to is that California is very careful with what they allow into the state as far as pests, parasites, foreign, seeds, etc. So there's a checkpoint at the border where you have to stop all inbound trucks, and they have inspectors that will inspect your load to make sure it's clean. So beekeepers sending bees into California have to make sure the beehives, the pallets they're on are perfectly clean. If there's a piece of dirt, then they will stop you. If they find a fire ant, for example, then they can reject your load. And so beekeepers have to work incredibly hard to stage their bees beforehand, clean them off perfectly well, make sure there's no grass seeds, grass, fire ants, anything at all that's going to catch that inspector's eye, and make sure it's a very clean load going into California because you don't want your load rejected. And then so that's a lot of what we have to deal with.
One fire ant can ruin it.
Depending on, yeah, I mean they can, they're supposed to it's supposed to be if they find more than five, if they find, I think if it's, I should know this all by heart, but I think if they find one or two live fire ants, they can reject your load
Has there
or up
been
to five dead ones.
Now, this is just the cynical side of me. Have there been any competitors there that actually plant fire ants on other people's stuff so they fail inspection?
Probably so. Probably so. I wouldn't doubt it.
No,
But
okay,
the
go ahead.
crazy thing is, I mean, there are already fire ants in California. So we're all a little baffled as to the strict how strict they're being, but go figure.
Now, things like foul brood. Have you seen any cases where, a whole truckload comes in and they find foul brood there, and then how do they handle that?
So they
American
don't
foul brood.
inspect, yeah, they don't inspect or regulate for bee pests. So
Okay.
yeah, so they aren't watching for that.
Oh, they're concerned
I
about
would
the environment in California, not what the bees are passing on to each other.
correct,
Oh,
correct.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, just their environment. And I will say that a surprisingly small amount of things get passed around in California. I mean, I think if you haven't been there, it's easy to have a vision of, well, there's, 1.5 or 1.8 million beehives in this one valley. They're probably all passing things around. It's a really big valley.
It is.
Um,
It's
it's a
horizon to
huge,
horizon valley. Yeah.
it's horizon to horizon. It's
Yeah.
hundreds and hundreds of miles long.
Yep.
And then when bees go into an orchard, you're putting, 12 to 24 beehives in one spot. And then you're going a long distance and putting 12 to 24 more. So
Mhm.
they're actually incredibly spread out. And I can say I've been doing this for 20 years. I've never gotten something out of California that I didn't already have, pest or
Okay.
pathogen wise. I mean,
That's interesting. Yeah.
yeah, it really isn't as much of a cesspool as people might imagine when it comes to bees.
Now, this is interesting too. The Almond Board last year reported a 30% loss of bees departing these almond groves. Do you know what your personal losses have been, or those under your management on average, or do you lose any coming out of almond pollination?
We don't lose any coming out of almond pollination. I mean, our bees grow in almonds, and I'd say that's a normal experience. Almond pollen is considered one of the, if not the most nutritious pollens for bees. It's incredible for growing bees. And so, um, what you send in is what you get out. If you send really bad bees to California, then you're going to get bad bees back. If you send good bees in, you're going to get great bees out because it's warm, it's sunny, there's incredible forage. Um, so our losses all occur before California. And this current loss that we're seeing, it had nothing to do with California. It has nothing to do with California. Everything that occurred happened last fall and summer, wherever the bees came from.
Now, right now, while we're talking, California is being hit by a huge weather system. Is that impacting almond pollination?
Not really. No, I mean they need the rain. So
Okay.
it only matters if it rains nonstop every day for weeks. Then that certainly impacts. And we've had years like that. In 2023, there were some areas that had 5 days of bee flight in the entire bloom period, and that certainly impacts the almond production. The bees actually did surprisingly well. We thought, oh, here this is going to be terrible. That the
Mhm.
bees brought in so much pollen and nectar in those 5 days that they did really well. Um, but yeah, a couple, 2, 3 days of rain and cold is fine as long as it stops.
Now, how do they choose when to start pollination and when to finish?
So the grower wants the bees there right as the first blooms begin. And so when there's any blooms on the trees, the grower wants the bees there working, which is fair because they're paying for the use of them. And then as far as when you pull the bees out, that's a very controversial topic. Beekeepers, we know that just because there's blooms left on the trees doesn't mean that they are viable blooms. If I've gone into orchards that there are still trees that look white and there's not a bee on them because they've already passed the viable period. But many growers, if they see any white on their trees, they want bees there just in case. So those last couple weeks are always a bit of a debate between the beekeepers and the growers on, hey, I need to get my bees out. It's time to go
Mhm.
on to the next event, and grower wants
So,
to hang on to them.
so are they following a calendar? I mean, everyone has to plan for this, especially when we're trekking across country. Um, is there a set calendar time frame? How does that
No,
work? And
that's why
how many weeks are we talking about total in the almond groves? They
so
call them groves, is that right?
yeah. So I would say it doesn't vary much. I mean, pretty consistently by February 15th, the almonds are in full bloom, which is tomorrow. And then pretty consistently by about March 15th, they're done. So it's about a 4 week period. And it would be shorter, but there's different varieties of almonds that bloom at different times. Um, so pretty consistently, it's February 15th to March 15th. Unusual years, you may start a week early and go a week late. But it is pretty consistently within that time frame.
Okay, so now the growers are also trying to kind of bee-proof themselves by coming up with these strains of almonds that are self-pollinating, and even those
Mhm.
benefit from the pollinator's presence.
They do.
how do you see that going? Is it really working very well, or they still have a lot of genetic work ahead of them? What's that look
Yeah.
like to you?
Yeah, great question. I mean, so the self-pollinators to date still need one beehive per acre. The non-self-pollinators need two hives per acre. So it's better, but they still need honeybees. And then the nuts from the self-pollinating varieties are not as high quality as the pollinator variety. So it's an inferior nut. It's harder to harvest. It doesn't pay as much because it's yeah, and it still needs bees. There are some new varieties that are coming out that are theoretically much better, that are self-pollinating. But the lifespan of an almond tree is 20 to 25 years. So even if they started planting 100% of almonds today, self-pollinating, you still got 20, 25 years of these pollinator varieties. And no grower is going to plant the self-pollinator ones that aggressively. They'll plant 10% of their acres and see how it goes. So yes, if we look at the next 50 years, the self-pollinators are slowly going to continue marching forward. But it's going to be a very slow march.
And did the electronic solution to their pollination problems fail? Specifically, the drop copters that were out there,
Yeah,
they could fly day and night, and they just dump pollen into the air and swirl it
yeah,
around the trees. How's that going?
yeah. So far, none of those technological advancements have been cost effective or as effective as honeybees. And so maybe someday, but right now, bees are still best. It's still our best and most economical option.
Okay, that's all great news. So now here we go. The trucks show up for pollination. You find out a bunch of these bees are dead. So this has nothing to do with the almond groves. This has to do with something, as far as you can tell, when did this impact on the bees begin calendar wise? When did we start to see some
Yeah.
unexplained die-offs?
Yeah, so there were rumblings that we had an issue last fall. Um, but there are always rumblings that we have issues every fall because that's when bees start dying after honey production's over. You're going into winter. That's when a lot of us see losses. So it's always really hard to know for certain what's normal rumblings versus, something truly different. And so there were some hints last fall that we might have an issue, but it really became evident in early January, early to mid-January,
Mhm.
when we started, yeah, looking at bees after they were coming out of winter, and I would say pretty definitively that most of us agree that that started last fall or last summer. So something went wrong last summer and fall, that triggered the loss that we're seeing today.
Mhm. And so a lot of people are, kind of pairing this up with colony collapse disorder. State of Pennsylvania,
Right.
we have Hackenberg. He was like the first guy to call it colony collapse. He lost all his,
Mhm.
it was a staging area. He lost so many of his bees. I think there are distinctive differences in what we're seeing. I mean, the die-off is a big deal. Do you think it's the same causation as colony collapse back in 2006, or are we looking at something different?
It's the multi-million dollar question. And I think the challenge is that we never fully identified what colony collapse disorder was the first time. I mean, it was largely agreed that, there wasn't one specific issue that led to the bees collapsing last time. It was a conglomerate of factors. It was, pests and viruses and pesticides and herbicides and weather events and kind of all that combined, lack of clean forage, all that combined to put too much pressure on the bees and they collapsed. And so beekeepers worked triple overtime to take even better care of their bees, more nutritional research, better forage, better treatments, better genetics. There was a lot of good that came out of colony collapse disorder. I mean, I remember 20 years ago before it hit, you would get laughed out of the room in a commercial setting if you talked about breeding more genetically resistant bees. Well, now we all do it. Now we're all into genetics and better bees and breeding and long-term uh, solutions. So, in one sense, I would say that exactly what those conglomerate of issues are, that could have changed. But I would put my money on the fact that we're probably seeing something similar in that there are multiple crises hitting the bees and stressors hitting the bees all at once that has led to them collapsing again, despite our best efforts as beekeepers.
Mhm.
So exactly what all those factors are, I'm not sure. So in one sense, it is similar to last time,
Mhm.
but the ingredients could be a little different this time.
Mhm. Because one of the things they also called it was disappearing bee disorder.
Right.
And so now, but the bees that are dying now are still in the hive, or are they also disappearing?
No, not necessarily. Yeah. I mean, we are seeing disappearing too. I mean, of
Okay.
the tens of thousands of dead beehives I've looked at in the past month, the vast majority don't have bees. They are gone. And whether they died out, over the winter or we don't really know, but we are seeing a lot of dwindling. And usually when bees disappear, it's not like a healthy hive just absconds. That virtually never happens. It's a dwindle. And so it starts out as a really strong hive, and over the course of 6 weeks, you know, too much of the population is dying, and the hive just dwindles, dwindles, dwindles until
Mhm.
it's one frame of bees and a queen, and then they die completely, or you're left with one or two frames of bees and a queen. So we are seeing a lot of that dwindling that is reminiscent of last time. The why is the tough question.
So when we have a dwindling colony or multiple dwindling colonies, don't those become targets for testing? In other words, with that, we've got the live
Absolutely.
bees, we've got the comb, we've got the brood area. Are those being isolated in any way, or is the Beltsville lab getting a bunch of them? What's going on?
Yeah, so that, if we're looking for good news, I mean, I think that that's a really big difference in what happened last time and this time. First time CCD hit, it took, I would say, a couple years to really even realize, or certainly months to really realize this is a big problem, to get the USDA involved, to get samples, and it's almost too late at some point to really get accurate samples. Big difference. I mean, I would say there were probably 10 of us beekeepers that kind of raised the alarm in probably the second week of January. And within 3 days, their USDA was there, independent researchers were there taking comb samples, pollen samples, living and dead bee samples, varroa mite samples. So that happened within a couple of days. So good samples have been taken, and now it's the nail biting wait for results. And that takes 1 to 3 months, depending on the test that's being performed.
Now we've lost some really good organizations like the Bee Informed Partnership that used to compile all of this data. And do we have another organization that stepped up that is now kind of central for reporting losses and then, of course,
Yeah,
cataloging cause and effect through a full spectrum of things that the bees are exposed to? Do we have that?
it's a great question. Yeah, there's certainly a huge loss with the Informed Partnership. I think this time around, the USDA is being pretty proactive. I'll give them that. Uh, Project Apis Elm is taking a very aggressive role in helping with this, as is ABF and AHPA. So I'd say right now it's Project Apis Elm, ABF, AHPA, and USDA researchers that are working in unison to tackle this issue. And no, I'm sure there's going to be some task force task forces that come out of this very shortly, that tackle this issue.
Mhm. So the backyard beekeepers are alive and well on all social media, blogs and vlogs and everything else, making
Yes.
speculations about um, how it impacts them. So how would we know, or how can we find out kind of nationally, the backyard or sideliners? Are you getting any information that they're impacted, that they're losing their colonies in an unusual rate, or what do you know?
It's a good question. So, I mean, I think that small scale beekeepers, and I was one for a very long time, I'm still heavily involved in the small scale industry. Um, I personally really appreciate the fresh approach and the ideas and the willingness to help. And I think that there is so much that we can work together on as a community. I mean, we all love bees. We're all here to help save bees.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate the feedback from the small scale industry. It's a vital industry, and I'm happy to work together on this issue. Um, there is not a it's harder to survey small scale beekeepers. Commercial beekeepers, it's a much smaller number, and they're businesses, and so it's a little easier to get a pretty fast, which we've done. Those survey results are coming out in the next couple of days. Pretty easy to get a very fast, comprehensive loss survey done with commercial beekeepers. Small scale is way more difficult. They're harder to find. And then so many small scale beekeepers get into beekeeping and they're in it for 1 or 2 years, and then they lose their bees and then they get out of it.
Hmm.
And it's hard to track those people because they're not still on social media on all the beekeeping pages.
Hmm.
We didn't have their contact information to start with. So we don't have a good way to tabulate those loss rates. All we have right now is a lot of people on social media saying, "Oh, I lost all my bees," or "Oh, my bees are doing great," and
Yep.
that's very anecdotal,
Yep. And then
for sure.
the other pride gets in the way, and you have all the beekeepers 100% never lost a bee since
Yeah,
1901. So
and
that's
those are the guys I want to learn from.
well, yeah, we want
Yeah,
to know what are the
uh,
parameters because
yeah,
environment plays such a heavy role. The
right.
other thing is they were asking for losses, I think on the 10th of January or something. Most of us in my neck of the woods, we don't know what we have until
Yes,
end of April or May. So
right.
these
Exactly.
reports come in far too early for
Hmm.
us to know what's going on. Do we have any geography that we can identify or environmental potentials where the commercial scale beekeepers had great losses in the southeast or desert southwest, or did the breadbasket of the
Yeah.
nation do pretty well? What do we know about that?
Right now, there were some unique weather events in the southeast that certainly were not helpful. We had snow in Florida, and then the hurricanes preceding that. And so the hurricanes are bad at wiping out forage, and that happened in the fall and wiped out a lot of forage that bees needed going into winter. Then you had the snows and the cold couple of weeks in the southeast. So the southeast has been hit particularly hard with weather. So I do think there is a weather element to the losses in the Southeast. Beyond that, though, when we look at the central US, the Midwest, the West, and Pacific Northwest, um, pretty bad loss rates commercially across the board. We're not seeing it right now limited to a specific geography, which is kind of unfortunate, right? I mean, we're not seeing correlation for, oh, this beekeeper used this treatment and this beekeeper didn't. Everybody that used this treatment had terrible losses, or this pollen patty had terrible losses, or this
Mhm.
region seems to be very widespread. Um, and that's why I'm kind of putting my money on it's a conglomerate of factors, and bees have once again been pushed over the edge. Because I think if it were one specific thing, we'd see more commonality in the losses than we're seeing.
Mhm. And there also, we need to identify, synergistic effects on bees as well, because I notice that people are using different cocktails of treatments, and
Hmm.
we have
100%.
treatment and we have treatment free and we have feed and don't feed and we have insulated hives and uninsulated hives and we have all of these
Yeah.
conflicting. But see, the thing is, people aren't able to isolate specific things because they're doing so many things at once to a colony
Yeah.
that we can't just say, well, that Langstroth hive seems to be working out the best. And
Right. Right.
right.
So true. And what discouraged me a little bit, and there's plenty of room for hope, which hopefully we can chat about for a second before we end, so it's not all doom and gloom. But
Nope.
I've got a couple commercial friends that they run treatment-free commercial operations that do not raise bees in heavy monoculture areas. So, which is very unusual in the commercial world, but I've got a couple friends that do it, a couple thousand hives, treatment free,
Hmm.
and they pull it off. I mean, they're incredible. Terrible losses this year, way beyond the realm of normal for them.
Do you have a
And
percentage?
about 60 to 70%.
Okay, but that's
And
actually not, that's not terrible. I mean, 60 to 70%, they've got, 35 to 40% of their bees left to work with. There are people reporting 90, 95% losses.
right, Right.
Um,
Well, their normal losses were more like 20 to 30%. So it was a double of what their
okay.
normal losses are.
And the
So
good,
you're
yeah,
right. They
and the good and bad news of that is now we don't have, now again, we can't say, well, it's treatments that caused it. So the
right,
scary
right,
part is we've got something beyond a treatment, whether it's an organic treatment or a synthetic treatment. And if it's no treatment and they died, we have to get our hands on those B bodies.
right. And
We
they
have to
have,
find out if
thankfully.
there's, pardon? They have them?
They have. Yes, yes.
Good. That's good news. Because now, see, we've just eliminated the fog of war here over treatment and treatment free. So everybody can now be on board that we need to find out what the problem is. You can't just throw rocks at each other and say, well,
Right.
you're still using Kumafos, you jerk. It's not like,
Yeah,
it's not
yeah,
like that. So the other
right.
thing is, and the next question that people will ask about when we have a treatment free operation, and then they have these losses kind of out of the blue, double the losses that they would expect. We would want to know what's the overfly potential for other apiaries that are being managed in a different way. Do you know their proximity to any other maybe variances in how the bees are being raised?
Yeah,
Treatment free right next to each other, we could have this mixing of bees going on, but it wouldn't impact the entire
yeah,
operation, right?
yeah. So I know one of the operations is in a very rural area. Um, doesn't have a tremendous number of commercial beekeepers as neighbors. The other, I'm not sure. That's a good question. But yeah, that's all the things we need to dive deeply into in the coming months to try to understand the cause of this.
Well, Blake, we need those answers right now. In fact, we need them during
I
this
agree.
conversation. We need
I
solutions.
agree.
Okay.
I will email the USDA on that
So
as we
we will
speak.
sit
Yeah.
here until you get those answers. Okay. So,
Good thing
and
I
I'm
brought
really
my water
not,
bottle.
I realize that it is actually a huge deal because there are commercial keepers that, a backyard beekeeper, if I lost all of my hives, I would just start over. When it's a commercial operation that employs a bunch of people, there's a huge investment. Some of them are running on a credit line and everything else. They could lose their business. Do you have any
Right.
sense of commercial keepers that maybe just aren't going to make it through this loss?
Yeah. Well, I hate to be, I don't want to be an alarmist. I think that um, this isn't going to be easy. I think that beekeepers and bees are unbelievably resilient for everything that's being thrown at them today. From a business perspective, it's a very low margin business and it's getting lower constantly because of how much it takes to keep our bees healthy. I don't know any bee, I mean, so many beekeepers, if they had $5 left, they would spend it on their bees before they'd spend it on their own lunch. Like these are people that love their bees to death. Um, but I've talked to a lot of beekeepers in the past weeks that have said if we don't have some sort of relief, it's over. I was talking to one friend that, 15,000 hive operation, he's down to about 1,500 beehives. And you just can't recover from that, and so there are a number of companies that have said, look, if unless we get some sort of relief really fast, which I kind of doubt we will, um, yeah, we're just going to have to go work somewhere else, do something else. So again, that's not the whole industry. The industry will survive. We will find a way forward. We're resilient. We will make sure that we pollinate crops that are needed. But I've never talked to so many people in as I have in the past 3 weeks that have said, "Yeah, I think this is it for me." Um,
Hmm,
it's very, very unusual. Yeah.
hmm. And so then who fills that gap?
This year it's going to be a stretch, because there's just not a ton of bees out there to build back with. I mean, there's a lot of bees out there, but not enough to build back to our previous levels. Um, it's a good question. I mean, it's going to be the next generation that steps
Mhm.
up and says, "Okay, we're our turn. We're going to have fresh new perspectives and fresh new ways of doing this, and we're ready to try again." And I think that next generation will step up. And then it's going to be some companies that just get bigger, some that,
Yeah.
you know, get bigger. And we're seeing consolidation happen in the industry already,
Mhm.
which, isn't always a good thing. Um, So I do think there will be an industry. I think there is a new wave of fresh ideas, which is I think what we need because what we're doing isn't working. And but it's going to be shake things up for a minute.
Mhm. So how does the next generation of beekeepers look? I mean, we like dairy farmers, just for example, the road I live on, we had 8 family dairy farms. We're down to one, and everybody likes to
Mm.
blame corporate farms. But the truth was, all the kids that grew up on these dairy farms didn't want to stay on the farm. They left. They went to other
Yeah,
places and did other jobs.
right,
They
right.
saw what that life is, and they didn't want any part of it anymore. So, how does the next gen of beekeepers? What are the numbers looking like? Is there interest?
You know, there's more than there used to be. So when I started keeping bees, I've told this story a few times, but I think I was 16 when I went to my first, maybe 15, when I went to my first national beekeeping group. And at the opening ceremony, there were about 800 beekeepers in the room. And I don't remember what the speaker was speaking about, but he was trying to make a point. And he said, okay, if you're over 40, if you're under 40 years old, stand up. And it was me and like three other people that stood up. And he said, okay, if you're under 30, stay standing. And I was the only person in 800 people that was still standing at under 30. That's different now. I mean, when you go to beekeeping clubs and state and national meetings, there's a lot of people under 30 and 40 now. And
Mhm.
so I do think that tide is shifting. Um, there's something about working with bees that is incredible and beautiful and unique, and it gets in your blood, maybe more than dairy farming does. I don't know. And there is a passionate group of, I think, the next generation that are ready to tackle this and try again. And so I'm encouraged by that. I see far more of that than I used to.
Now, for the backyard beekeepers, we seem really loaded with all these different options and tools and kits and nutritional supplements and everything else. Do we need to be simplifying our beekeeping practices and focus more on genetics? Or what do you think about all these new tools and tips and
Yeah,
tricks that are showing up at every
yeah.
convention we go to?
Well, as someone that has a bee supply company and sells a lot of that stuff,
It's
um,
okay.
I will tell you that 95% of it you do not need to be a successful beekeeper.
Right.
I think that if you pay attention to genetics, nutrition at a very basic level, and pest management, you'll be a successful beekeeper. And everything else kind of fades into the background. This is where I think small scale beekeepers would do well to pay attention to the products and the quantities of products that are used by commercial beekeepers. Because commercial beekeepers, A, care more about their bees than anybody on the planet. I mean, I have seen
Oh,
more,
you're gonna go. Oh,
I
there's people
know.
out. There's people in 10-degree weather hugging their hives right now, listening to their bees. So, all
Yes,
right,
that's fair point. Fair point.
there are people
I've
that
seen,
love their bees in the yard. Okay.
yes, I've seen more, grown men crying this past 3 weeks over their dead bees than I've ever seen in my life, and they spend their entire life, dedicated to taking care of them. They like bees more than they like people in many cases. So, yes, that exists on all levels of beekeeping. I apologize. Um, but the commercial guys are number one, they care tremendously about their bees, but they're also running a business. And so they're looking at the return on investment. Um, and they do a really good job of kind of weeding through what is hopeful and what is snake oil. And there's a lot of snake oil out there. And so I'll say in my business, we use um, we don't use a lot of different products. I mean, it's three or four different products that we use, and everything else we try everything, but there's most of it isn't very helpful. Um,
Okay, so let me pause you there because I think you're being polite. Maybe you don't want to appear to be marketing anything. What are these useful products that you use that you find really have value for the health and well-being of the bees?
yeah, well, I'm going to get in trouble when I start listing off products, but I will anyway.
It's just
Uh,
us. It's just us.
right.
Are
So,
these sold at thebeesupply.com?
well, they are because I believe in them.
Okay, good.
Um,
Let's do it.
Yeah, there you go. So, what we use in our operation, we use global pollen patties.
Okay.
I'm a big that's and I spend hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on them. So I, you know, it's not like I'm blowing smoke. I actually use them and spend a lot of money on them.
What time of year?
I
What time of year? I'm gonna put
um,
this in.
Yep. So the most important time is when bees are raising the winter generation of bees of the next generation of bees. So for us, it's going to be starting about 8 weeks before the broodless period.
Oh, so
So
you're
8 weeks
talking October,
early.
September?
Yes, earlier the better. I mean, there's some if you're waiting until it starts getting cold, it's way too late. So we
Hmm.
are we are starting 8 weeks before the broodless period begins. We want the final generations of bees raised to have all the nutrition that they need. Because one of the big reasons for losses, I believe, in general, is that the bees being raised in the fall didn't have the proper nutrition to survive the entire winter. And so you see that hive dwindle. So anyway, so 8 weeks before is when we start feeding.
And we should also qualify that by saying that from the commercial aspect, you also have to make grade with your colonies early in the year where the backyard person would not.
Yes, I would agree with that. I'd also say though, these days it's about just keeping them alive, you know. Um, and I view pollen, and I'll be the first to say I view pollen substitute as insurance. Some years, some areas, totally unnecessary. If you've got a great fall pollen flow that's very multiple kinds of pollen and a great quantity, you don't need pollen substitute.
Okay.
But it's relatively cheap. And if you have a dearth year or you have a hurricane come through or it was especially hot and dry, pollen substitute's a great insurance, relatively cheap insurance to make sure they've got the nutrition they need to raise the winter bees. So I'll be the first to say, you know, so every time I talk about pollen sub, someone comes to me and goes, "I've never used it. My bees are amazing." It's great. I'm not going to say that, you don't have to use it. Um, so global pollen substitute, I love. We use strategically, we use a product called Complete. Um,
Complete. I never even heard of this.
Complete. Yep. And they've got a few different products, and we use it depending on the situation. We'll either mix it with syrup that we're feeding. It's got like 160 different ingredients. And if our bees are nutritionally stressed, we find that it helps make up some of the nutritional deficits. It's very similar to Apis Biologics or Rocket Fuel, which I
So,
also think is a pretty good
so you're
product.
saying this is as a powder that gets mixed, or
It's a
how's it?
liquid,
It's
a
a
liquid.
liquid,
Yeah,
and then
yeah.
you mix it
So
with what? Somebody's going to ask, is it 1-to-1 sugar syrup? Is it 2-to-1 sugar syrup?
yeah,
What do you mix it
yeah.
with?
If it's fed in the fall, it's 2-to-1 sugar syrup. If it's fed anytime else, it's 1-to-1. Um, and we find it if we're trying to get our bees through a stressful period, which I would call like a long summer dearth, stressful, or if there is poor nutrition, maybe from a hurricane, uh, we find it helpful to add complete or Apis biologics in to give the bees an extra nutritional boost. So that's helpful. We have also switched um, in the spring, early spring, we will feed probiotics, strong microbials, probiotics
Interesting. Okay.
instead of any sort of antibiotic. For years, beekeepers used antibiotics to control European foul brood, um, and uh, I don't like using antibiotics, and so we switched to in if it's a wet year which is, cold, wet springs are notorious for chalk brood and European foul brood. And we found that when we have cold, wet springs, we use probiotics, the strong microbials probiotics, and we're able to keep European foul brood under control without using any antibiotics.
And that does
Um,
come as a powder, right? That
that
from
is a powder.
microbials, because
Yes,
I've got that
yes,
it's in some kind of aluminum foil packet looking
yes,
thing.
yeah. And
And
if
you're
it's a
mix
warm, dry, oh, go ahead.
and see, we could feed that as mixed with dry powdered sugar or something, right? It doesn't have to be a
Hmm.
liquid.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be liquid. No. Yeah, yeah. You
Okay.
can actually apply it just as a powder.
And, and
And
just to reaffirm this for the listeners, it's actually great to have some of this stuff available because some of what you described, we might have an unusual dearth ahead. We might not have rain in the forecast for 3 weeks at a critical time, and you need kind of tools on the shelf to sustain your bees through that period. There's another kind of live and let die philosophy where people are suggesting that, well, then you're going to weaken your genetics and you should just let your bees die that aren't able to manage an extended dearth like that. What's your personal philosophy for backyard beekeepers who want to be as holistic as they can? You
Mhm.
think cheating a little bit to keep them alive just makes good sense, or should we be letting them die out and go with that last two colonies that just happen to survive the dearth?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it's a question that deserves, I mean, deserves real thought. And I think that better genetics is the long-term future of sustainable beekeeping. So I don't, before, as I'm about to answer the question, I don't mean to disparage better breeding genetics, tougher bees. I do believe that's the future. I think where most people fail is in understanding how better genetics actually result. So I have two lines of thinking. One is just proper animal husbandry. We don't buy a bunch of cows, put them in a field with no grass or water, and say, well, that I hope they survive.
Whoever's
We
alive in
we
3 weeks, we'll take those.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
right.
So there is an element here of just proper animal husbandry where we pay attention to the weather, unusual weather. We wouldn't not bring our dogs inside if it's negative 20 degrees. I mean, so on a high level, we do watch for abnormalities and we should respond appropriately to our animals that we're caring for. Secondarily, just letting bees die. Um, if you're not breeding from the survivors in a closed environment, you're not really helping yourself that much. Now, if you really understand bee breeding and you've got 20 hives and X number are dying and you're breeding queens from the survivors, and you're also making sure those queens are mating with survivor drones as well. Like if you're really launching a full breeding program, sure, absolutely, that's in essence how it works. But if you've got two hives in your backyard and you're just letting them die every year, you don't have a breeding program, and you're not really propagating the survivor genetics. So unless you're going to those lengths, yeah, you're just letting bees die.
Mhm, mhm. And I also think it's important that we share both sides of this philosophy. If you want to feed your bees, this is what's going to work, that's going to sustain them. If you decide to be a live and let die beekeeper, we've given you the option. That's what I like to
Sure.
do. I'm not going to tell them,
Yes.
you know, I want to
Yes.
give them all the information and then they decide what they'll do based on what they feel is right for what they're hoping to get
Right.
for their bees. Is that so?
I'm with
Those
you.
are all the things that you mentioned that you
Yeah,
recommend.
those are the primary products. And like some, like if it's a warm, dry spring, we won't use the probiotics, so we're watching the weather. So I'd say the only one that we are consistently using is pollen patties year in, year out. Um, The other, as I mentioned, are kind of weather based. And then, of course, feeding sugar syrup. I mean, that's a given, depending on the weather. And even as a commercial beekeeper, we do leave a box of honey on our bees to overwinter. So we leave honey for our bees. But again, if it's a terrible drought year, and our bees are going to starve, yes, I'll feed my bees before I let them starve.
Hmm. Now I'm looking behind you. All these boxes are mediums, it looks like.
Yes, they
In
are.
in
Yeah.
your operations, are you exclusively all medium boxes?
No, we're primarily deeps, actually.
Okay.
two deep boxes is our standard brood nest, and then we have a bunch of mediums for honey supers.
And so is that what goes to the pollen for
Hmm.
the almonds? Is it two
Hmm.
deeps?
You got it. That's the most common configuration.
And then what's on top of that? Migratory cover or
Hmm. Yeah, it's just as a pallet, two deep boxes, and then a migratory cover. Yeah, pretty simple setup.
and then how do you feed a hive that's configured like that if you need it to?
So we have division board feeders, the internal division board
Okay.
feeders, one in each deep box, and they stay in year round. And so if they need an emergency feed, we don't want to have to worry about getting a bunch of feeders in there. So the feeders stay in there year round. So we actually have 8 frames in each deep box and a feeder. And so if they need emergency feed, it's ready.
So you keep those feeders in the top box?
Both boxes actually.
Oh, you
Uh,
each have
each
one.
each
Ah,
box has a feeder. Yeah,
okay.
yeah. That way,
And
if they need a lot of food quickly, we can get it
who
to them.
who makes these division board feeders?
Um, we actually do. So our the ones we use through commercial bee supply or the bee supply, we have a manufacturer that we make our own.
And by the way, for those listening and watching, the links to all these websites are going to be down in the video description. So you don't need to write stuff down. I'm going to do that for you. Thebeesupply.com. So,
Thank you.
okay, what else are we talking about now that we've satisfied that we've got these losses? We're going to learn more later. So if there is a reporting website for all backyard beekeepers and everything else, or a reporting system, um, if you have that, if you could send me the link, I could post that for people for
Okay,
spring. There will be updates too if
great.
stuff comes around, and we can find out. What would you like to just freelance share with us about beekeeping and where we're
Yeah.
headed and things we should be doing?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think in light of the current crisis that we're seeing, I think that there is a lot of hope. I think that beekeeping will still be here, and we'll find a way through this. I think good things will come of this. I think the best thing that we can all do is just work together as an industry, small scale, sideline commercial, and support our industry. And that looks like buying local honey. Yeah, that directly supports beekeepers. It looks like educating friends, family, neighbors on what not to spray in their yards. And it looks like reaching out to your legislators if you have contacts and letting them know, hey, we have a problem with the bees and we need all the research and support that we can get. So those are some actionable items that would be incredibly helpful right now. And I do think that working together that we will find solutions and beekeeping is not going anywhere. But it does need some help right now, in the meantime.
So now, supporting research, we talking, colleges and universities that have research departments that
Mhm.
need support. How does somebody,
Yeah,
that's sitting here listening, how do I help? What can I do? How can I support research efforts?
it's a good question. So I think that um, I can send you some information you can link to actually on that, some industry letters that your listeners could send directly to their local legislators who make funding decisions. And it's a call to, hey, please support our beekeeping researchers so that we can do better by our bees. So I could send that to you to link to, and yeah, just sending that to your local representatives is helpful.
Okay, that sounds good. So what's next for you? You have the almonds that how much are you actively participating? Once all the bees are there, what's your role?
So it's really monitoring. So I mean, the next are as of pretty much last night, the last of the bees went into the almond orchards. The almonds are blooming now, and so we take a deep breath and we check beehives, see if they need any help in any area. Grading happens, so the growers are sending inspectors out to check the bees to make sure that they are strong enough to meet the contract.
Hmm.
And then it's going to be getting the bees home. And really, 3 weeks from now, we're going to be pulling bees out of the almonds, and they're going to go back to wherever home is to be split and try to recoup the losses.
And then do they go on to other pollination contracts or?
Mhm. For my company, no. The only pollination we do is almonds, so we focus on honey production. So it is much harder to keep bees alive when you're pollinating year round because they're exposed to a lot more pesticides and herbicides, fungicides. So I don't pollinate anything but almonds. So I'll be focused on producing honey, but lots of other beekeepers are going to other pollination events.
Mhm. Now, how much cooperation is there with the growers when they go through and they're driving these trucks and they're spraying their flowers, they're spraying their almond trees?
Yeah.
When the bees are on them, what's what
Yeah.
can we do to get them to do that at night or something?
Yeah. I will say it's all about relationships and educating your growers. But it's so much better than it used to be. It, used to a lot of growers would spray day or night, didn't pay attention to the bees. I will say it's rare now that even in almonds that in any spraying occurs when bees are actively foraging. I mean,
Okay.
they're very careful about applying it before bees get there, and waiting till the bees leave to do any sort of pest application. So I'm very encouraged by that. That growers across the country are way more careful than they used to be. We still have work to do, but they are more cognizant of how precious bees are.
Mhm. And what is it that they spray the trees with?
Totally depends on the year. If it's a really wet year, then they're spraying, for fungus, try to inhibit funguses. In the fall, they're spraying pests. So it just really depends on the weather and the year, but most of it occurs, if not all of it, when bees aren't present.
Okay, so now I'm going to ask a question that you may not know the answer to, but I'm trying to track down an entomologist to
Sure,
talk to me
sure.
about H5N1, high path avian influenza.
Yeah.
What, no correlation with the die-off.
So I've talked to a few researchers about that actually, who are
Yeah,
way smarter than I am,
yeah.
and they see no possible connection. They say that as they work in their brilliant minds on could it even transfer to honeybees, uh, they see absolutely no possibility of transfer. But well, like I said, they've got a tremendous amount of dead bee samples, and they are running a lot of
Huh.
virus testing, and I'm sure they'll look at that.
Okay, so just the two of us, let's talk, because I'm also a poultry technician, which
Yeah.
does not mean that I'm a genius in all diseases in poultry, but here's what I think people are thinking and why they're kind of freaking out about it. Because right now, avian influenza, which is what we're talking about, H5N1, there's high path and low path. There are these variants, right? Um, Bees can't contract it. However, they can move it around. So when the bees are drinking at wet locations that some of our migratory fowl are using, um, and the targets that are moving it around right now are swans, geese, and mallard ducks.
Mm,
So, but and then so then the bees would be. This is, and I should clarify this too. We're concerned about biosecurity with poultry operations. In other words, we try to keep it out of the different grow out houses for the fryers, right? And
mhm,
then we also have these battery chickens, and bees really can't get in there. So, because that's the other thing that will come up. Well, I've seen, bees in chicken feed and in the
mm,
dust and in the corn, and that's
right.
true. The bees will go all over the place. But what we're worried about, the vectors for H5N1 in the poultry industry are the flies, and I even named the top three: the blowflies, the mosquitoes, and rodents. And this is because they carry it with their body. Bees at best are going to carry it fresh on their feet, but the minute it dries out, it's done. It's no longer
Mm,
viable. I don't know if people have seen chickens in these grow out houses and the ventilation systems that move the air constantly through there. Sometimes flies get in there and chickens will eat flies.
mm,
So this is why that works. So I'm trying to put to
gotcha.
rest, and I've reached out to Penn State, and they're working on it because I wanted to get a real solid scientist to explain in very final terms that the honeybee is not dying because of this exposure.
Mm,
The risk is that it potentially can help spread it around, but then they're not even on the list of the animals
Mm.
that we know of that can vector that H5N1. What do you think about that?
That's perfectly logical, and it sounds like you are a pretty good expert to speak to that.
Well,
So,
no, because
um,
I just draw chicken blood and stuff like that, and we send it out for testing in the
mhm,
National
mhm.
Poultry Improvement Plan and things like that. So, I mean,
Oh,
state by state, they're going to control that, but I would just say this isn't the year to invest in your top birds, and because you
no
start them early
kidding.
enough, so you've got cockerels and pullets, and you've got that
Mhm.
class, and you've got the full size roosters, and then the full size hens in different breed categories.
Wow, wow.
So,
One of the challenges, because I know a USDA scientist I work a lot with, who would be perfect to speak to this. One of the challenges we're running into right now is because of the new political administration that has come in. Eh, they have frozen all communications. So the government agencies aren't allowed to speak publicly about current issues right now. Um,
like even
so
these kinds of issues, you
even
mean
these kinds of issues. So
what?
like the USDA isn't allowed to make statements or to, get on and chat with you, right now. So they're just kind
Well,
of at a
yeah, and
communication
that's
freeze.
yeah, and like poultry technicians, because we're in this thread that is, it's latent. We get all this information about where avian influenza. Are aware of bird markets and things like that because we're doing blood testing. We have to submit for that. We're also not allowed to
Mm,
post on social media. Hey, did you know
mm,
400,000
yeah,
birds over here are being
yeah,
composted because they
yeah,
have
yeah.
influenza?
Right.
It's
Oh my
and
goodness.
people do flip out about the numbers of birds, millions of chickens, but they don't understand we're in the billions of chickens.
Wow. Wow.
It's chickens have beat out every other meat produced in the world.
Wow.
That's it. Chickens, there are more
Incredible.
chickens on Earth than there are people.
Wow.
I
That's
want to
incredible.
put it in perspective.
Right.
So,
Right. Amazing. Amazing.
and another
Wow.
thing that I think about too, like bee genetics. If you were concerned that we were going to lose genetics, it can come down to some people that are doing this work in kind of a small way, maybe being the sole source of some valuable genetic strain. It's
Mm,
happened before with poultry that sometimes backyarders or smaller poultry operations have been the one that sustained a certain breed for the American Livestock Breeds
wow.
Conservancy because we have at-risk poultry. So
So
go ahead.
you're such a unique perspective. We don't usually have crossover between industries like this. And there's so much I think we can learn in the beekeeping industry talking to people like yourself that are so heavily involved in another industry.
Mhm. Well, I think bees and chickens are standard companion. If you're a doomsday prepper, that's what you have, bees and
That's
chickens.
right. For sure.
Which
For
I am
sure.
not a doomsday prepper. I don't want anybody to
Me,
come after my stuff when it all hits
uh,
the fan.
me
So,
neither.
I really appreciate the time that you've given us, and this is a lot of really good information that I hope will help people gain perspective and not panic over what's going on. Wait and see what pans out. And do you have any final words?
No, I think you've asked great questions, and yeah, I appreciate the industry's concern and support, and I think spreading awareness is important as we all seek to do a better job of taking care of bees and figuring out how to conquer the many pressures that are facing them today. So yeah, I just appreciate people listening, appreciate you guys being concerned and keep the ideas coming. I mean, I think it's healthy, and I'm eager to work through this together as an industry.
Mm. Okay, thank you so much. And for those listening and watching, this is the podcast, The Way to Be, and it is, of course, YouTube at Frederick Dunn. So check the video description. All the links are there. I'm just going to do a quick rundown in case you don't know. These are Blake's companies. DesertCreekHoney.com, DesertCreekBulkBees.com, DesertCreekPollination.com, CommercialBeeSupply.com, and TheBeeSupply.com. Did I leave anything
Thank
out?
you. You got it. That's more than
Okay.
sufficient. Thank you.
There you go. Thanks a lot.
My pleasure.
Yep.